My son, my own flesh and blood. Sold my $4 million Texas farm from right under me. Then he had the gall to drive his shiny new SUV up my gravel driveway, walk into the home I built with my own two hands, and hand me a check for $15,000. Get out and disappear, he said, his voice as cold and flat as a winter pond. He thought he was putting his senile old mother out to pasture. He thought he had one. But as I looked at the smug, arrogant man my son had become, I just smiled. He had no idea what I had already set in motion. Before I tell you exactly what I did, and trust me, you'll want to hear every last detail, I'd love to know where you're all listening from. It gives me strength to know I'm not alone. Drop your city or country in the comments, and let me know what time it is where you are. It's amazing to think my story is reaching so many corners of the world. Now let me take you back to that Tuesday afternoon that changed everything. The air in the living room of my Bluebonnet Creek farmhouse was thick with the promise of rain. A heavy, earthy scent that usually brought me comfort. I was sitting in the worn leather armchair my late husband, John, had bought at an auction 40 years ago. From that chair, I could see the rolling fields we'd transformed from untamed scrubland into a thriving enterprise. I remembered arriving here as a young woman, my hands soft and my head full of dreams. John and I had poured our youth, our sweat, and every dime we had into this soil. This wasn't just land, it was a living testament to our love and our life's work. A legacy I intended to protect with my last breath. Ethan's luxury car crunching on the gravel was a sound that had become increasingly unwelcome. He walked in without knocking, a small act of disrespect that spoke volumes. He moved with an air of ownership, his expensive suit looking comically out of place against the rustic backdrop of the farmhouse. He tossed a thin envelope onto the solid oak coffee table John had built. It landed with a quiet, insulting slap. "What's this, Ethan?" I asked, my voice betraying none of the cold dread coiling in the pit of my stomach. I kept my hands resting on the arms of the chair, my knuckles white. "That," he said, gesturing dismissively, "is your retirement. $15,000. I've sold the farm." The words seemed to suck the air out of the room. I stared at him, at his perfectly coiffed hair, his polished shoes, the son I no longer recognized. "You what?" "I sold it, Mom. For $4 million, he repeated, his tone infuriatingly casual. "Let's be honest, you're 67. You can't manage this place anymore. You're forgetting things. It's a liability. I did this for your own good. For your own good." The phrase was a dagger twisted with precision. It was the same phrase he'd been using for the better part of a year. A slow, methodical campaign to undermine my sanity. Started with my keys. I'd leave them on the hook by the door, the same place for 40 years, only to find them later in the refrigerator. "Oh, Mom," he'd say with a sigh, "it's for your own good that I keep a spare." Then it was important mail, financial statements that would vanish from my desk before I could open them, causing me to miss payments. "See," he'd say, producing the crumpled envelope from his briefcase days later. "It's for your own good that I take over your finances." He was building a case against me brick by insidious brick, trying to prove to me, and to the world, that I was incompetent. He was trying to gaslight me into oblivion. He saw the flicker of pain in my eyes and pressed his advantage. "Look, the deal is done. The new owners are a development corporation. They want you out by the end of the month. This check is more than enough for you to get a nice little apartment in Austin and live comfortably." He was not just taking my home. He was erasing it. A development corporation. My fields, my pecan groves, all to be bulldozed for cookie-cutter houses. He was kicking me out. My own son was throwing me away. A wave of pure, unadulterated rage washed over me, so powerful it made my vision swim. But I took a slow, deep breath and locked it away. An emotional outburst was what he expected. It was what he wanted. It would only confirm his narrative of the hysterical, senile old woman. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. I had to play the part he'd so carefully crafted for me. But as I looked into his cold, calculating eyes, he was about to learn a fundamental lesson. You don't corner a woman who has nothing left to lose. He thought the game was over, but I knew it had only just begun. The question was, what was my first move? Instead of giving him the tears and hysterics he was banking on, I did something that visibly unsettled him. I smiled. It wasn't a warm or happy smile. It was the calm, detached smile of a general surveying a battlefield, knowing exactly where the enemy's weaknesses lay. Ethan's confident smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. He had a script prepared for a fight, for a breakdown. He had no lines for this quiet, unnerving composure. "Well," I said, my voice as smooth as aged whiskey. "If it's done, it's done." I allowed my shoulders to slump just a little, a calculated bit of theater. "I suppose you're right. This old place is a lot of work. I am getting tired." The relief that washed over his face was so transparent it was almost comical. He thought I was folding, capitulating to his superior intellect and will. "I knew you'd understand, Mom," he said, his condescending tone returning. "Of course, dear. But do you mind if I see the papers?" I asked, gesturing toward the folder. "Just for my own peace of mind. To see that everything is in order." He puffed up his chest, eager to display the proof of his conquest. "Absolutely." He fanned the documents out on the coffee table like a winning hand of poker. "See? Everything is above board. Your signature right here authorizing the sale." I leaned forward, pretending to squint. I stared at the looping scrawl at the bottom of the main deed. It was a decent forgery, I had to admit. He must have practiced. But the pressure was wrong, the V in Vance was too sharp. It was the signature of a man in a hurry, not the deliberate script of a woman who had signed countless checks and contracts over 4 decades. As I stared at that fraudulent mark, my mind wasn't in the living room anymore. It was back 3 weeks prior, standing in my kitchen, the phone pressed hard against my ear. My younger son, Sam, had been on the other end, his voice a frantic, broken whisper. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know who else to call," he choked out. He was an artist in Santa Fe, sensitive and kind, the complete opposite of his brother. I was at Ethan's office. I was just dropping off a painting for his wife's birthday. The door to his private office was ajar. I heard him on a speakerphone call with some lawyer. They were laughing, Mom. They were laughing about how easy it was going to be, how they had samples of your signature from old checks. He said you were losing your marbles and that this was a mercy killing for the farm. The cruelty of it had been a physical blow. But hearing the anguish in Sam's voice as he was forced to betray his brother to save his mother, that was what had solidified the ice in my veins. That was the moment I knew I could not show any mercy. I had comforted my good son, told him he had done the right thing, and promised him I would handle it. I pushed the papers back across the table toward Ethan. "All right, son," I sighed, perfecting the image of weary resignation. "It seems you've thought of everything." "I always do, Mom. But before I start packing up my life," I said, looking him straight in the eye, my gaze unwavering, "I want one last thing. It's not too much to ask, is it? I want you to take me to a proper farewell dinner. Just you and me. The governor's table. My treat." His triumphant smile was blinding. "Of course, Mom. Anything for you. You deserve it. A final celebration before your new, quiet life begins." Oh, it would be a celebration, all right. And it would certainly be final. He thought he was arranging a simple dinner. He had no clue he was an unwitting guest of honor at his own execution. The pieces were all in place, the trap was meticulously set. Now, all I had to do was wait for the wolf to walk willingly into the snare. But as he walked out my door, a shiver of fear ran down my spine. Could my nerve truly hold until the final moment? The next morning, the engine of my old Ford pickup rumbled to life in the pre-dawn stillness. I drove into Austin, the rolling hills of my beloved Texas landscape still shrouded in a soft gray mist. The bluebonnets were beginning to fade, but the stubborn yellow of the coreopsis lined the highway like a ribbon of gold. On any other day, the drive would have filled me with a quiet joy. Today it was a warpath. I wasn't just driving to a meeting. I was driving towards justice. I was going to see my secret weapon, my lawyer Beatrice B. Chan. I hadn't scrambled to find B in the days following Sam's panicked phone call. That would have been too little, too late. No, I was a farmer. I knew that the most important work happens long before the storm arrives. You prepare the soil, you plant the seeds, you build the fences. I had started building my fences 6 months ago. The gaslighting had become my new terrifying reality. One day I found a stack of unpaid utility bills in a drawer with old tablecloths. Bills I knew I had never received. Ethan appeared that same afternoon, a look of deep concern on his face. "Mom, I got a call from the electric company. They were about to cut the power. You can't let things slip like this." He was creating the problems and then swooping in as the savior. The final straw had been when he tried to convince me I had imagined a conversation with my oldest friend Maria. "You didn't talk to her, Mom. I spoke to her yesterday. She's been out of town for a week," he'd said with such conviction I'd almost believed him. I hung up the phone with him and immediately called Maria. She had been home all week. We had spoken the day before. He was trying to isolate me, to make me believe my own mind was a traitor. That afternoon, I confided in my farmhand, Carlos. He'd started here as a boy, working alongside my John. He was more family than employee. I told him everything, my voice shaking. He didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me with a quiet, fierce loyalty. "Ma'am," he'd said, his voice a low rumble. "I don't mean to overstep. But for months after Mr. Ethan visits, I see you looking lost. 2 weeks ago I saw him leaving your office. He had a stack of your bank statements in his hand. He told me you asked him to file them for you. I knew then something was wrong. You are the most organized woman I have ever known." His simple, honest validation was the rock I needed to stand on. That night I didn't sleep. I researched. I looked for the toughest, smartest elder law and asset protection attorney in the state of Texas. That's how I found B. When I first walked into her sleek, modern office, I made it clear I wasn't a helpless victim. "Miss Chun," I'd said, "I am the founder and CEO of a multi-million-dollar agricultural corporation. I believe I am facing a hostile takeover from an inside party, and I need to build an ironclad defense." B had never once underestimated me. She saw the businesswoman, not the senior citizen. For 6 months we had been allies, plotting in secret. We had been methodical. We had been patient. We had been preparing for this exact day. As I pulled into the parking garage of BA's building, I took a deep, steadying breath. Today was not about fear. It was about execution. What final pieces of the puzzle had she uncovered? B. Chin's office was an oasis of calm and power high above the bustling streets of Austin. She greeted me with a firm, reassuring hug. "You were right about everything, Eleanor," she said, her voice a mixture of professional anger and personal sympathy. "He's more brazen than I even anticipated." We sat in her conference room, a place that had become my sanctuary and war room. B didn't waste any time. She laid a file on the polished glass table. "My investigator is the best in the business." He confirmed that Ethan filed the forged deed of sale with the Travis County Clerk's office at precisely 3:47 p.m. yesterday. Officially, according to a cursory public records search, the farm is no longer in your name. Even though I was prepared, the word still landed like a punch. To see it in black and white, the official betrayal, made a cold knot tighten in my stomach. "But," B said, her voice dropping as she leaned forward, a sharp predatory smile playing on her lips, "the public record doesn't tell the whole story. He just sold something that, for all legal intents and purposes, he had no right to touch." She slid a second, much thicker document across the table. The cover page was embossed in gold. The Bluebonnet Creek Irrevocable Trust. It was dated 3 months prior. "As you recall," B continued, her tone crisp and clear, "3 months ago we legally and quietly transferred the full ownership of the farm, the land, the structures, the equipment, the brand, everything into this trust. It is an ironclad legal entity. You, Eleanor Vance, are its sole lifetime beneficiary and trustee. This means only you have the legal authority to authorize any sale, any loan, any major decision regarding the property. Any attempt to sell it without your explicit, witnessed and notarized consent is as legally binding as a child selling the White House." Tears I didn't know I was holding back pricked at the corners of my eyes. It was a feeling of pure, unadulterated relief. The anchor of my life, my home, was safe. It had been safe all along. "So the sale, it's a phantom?" I whispered, needing to hear it again. "It's a ghost," B confirmed. "A $4 million ghost. The buyer, which my investigator traced to a shell corporation Ethan himself set up last year, just bought a very expensive piece of Texas air. But wait, it gets better." She turned her sleek laptop toward me and opened an audio file. My own voice filled the room, sounding frail and rehearsed, followed by Ethan's confident, condescending tones from our conversation the day before. "That beautiful fountain pen I suggested you give him for his last birthday?" B said with a triumphant wink. "It's a state-of-the-art digital audio recorder with a 30-hour battery. We have him on a crystal-clear recording, admitting to the sale, quoting the price, and acknowledging he was giving you a pittance of the value. We have his confession, Eleanor. We have it all." A fierce, wild joy surged through me. We had him. We had him trapped in a legal cage of our own making. He thought he was the master puppeteer, but he had been dancing on our strings the entire time. The question was no longer if we would win, but how utterly and completely we would make him lose. What would the final act of this tragedy look like? A feeling of pure, cold power settled over me as I drove the long road back to the farm. For 6 long months I had lived a double life. In public, and especially in front of Ethan, I was Eleanor Vance, the aging matriarch, perhaps a bit confused, slowing down, losing her grip. But in private, with B, I was Eleanor Vance, the strategist, the fighter, the queen on the chessboard preparing to defend her kingdom. The strain of that duality had been immense. But now the end was in sight. The mask was about to come off. When I got home, the first thing I did was walk out to the pecan grove John and I had planted in our first year. I placed my hand on the rough bark of the oldest tree. "We're safe, my love," I whispered to his memory. "They won't take our home." Then I went inside and made the call to Sam. I walked him through every single detail, from the irrevocable trust to the recorder pen. I could hear him exhale a shaky breath of relief across the phone line. "Oh, Mom. I was so scared for you. I hated having to go behind his back." "You did what you had to do to protect your family, Samuel," I told him, my voice firm. "That is nothing to be ashamed of. Now I need you to do one more thing for me. I need you to be strong. I need you at the governor's table tomorrow night. Be there at 8:30, a half hour after Ethan and I arrive. Sit at the bar where you can see our table, but don't let him see you until I give the signal. I need a witness. More than that, I need my good son there with me when I face my other one." He agreed without a moment's hesitation, his voice filled with a new resolve. That evening, as I watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the Texas sky in fiery shades of orange and purple, Ethan called. His voice was like honey laced with arsenic. "Hey, Mom. Just confirming our dinner for tomorrow. 8 o'clock. I've reserved the best table in the house for us." "That's wonderful, son," I said, my own voice a perfect imitation of motherly warmth. "I am so looking forward to our special night." "Great," he said, clearly pleased with himself. "I'll pick you up at 7:30. No, don't you worry about that," I said quickly. I needed to arrive on my own terms. "I have an errand to run in Austin beforehand. I'll meet you there. Besides," I added, letting a playful note enter my voice, "I have a big surprise for you too." "Oh," he said, his interest piqued. His arrogance was his greatest weakness. He couldn't imagine a surprise that wasn't to his benefit. "I love surprises. I think you'll find this one unforgettable," I replied and hung up before he could ask any more questions. The next night I prepared for battle. I chose the elegant red dress, a symbol of power and defiance. I fastened the pearl earrings from John, my personal armor. As I looked at my reflection in the mirror, I didn't see a 67-year-old woman on the verge of being cast aside. I saw the woman who had faced down droughts, floods, and financial ruin to build an empire. He thought he was taking his frail mother out for a pity dinner. He was about to find out he'd made a reservation with a reckoning. The only question left was, would I have the strength to see it through to the bitter end? The governor's table was designed to make men like my son feel important. The lighting was low, the wood was dark and gleaming, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive steak and quiet power. Ethan was already seated at a corner booth, the best table in the house, looking completely at home. He stood when I arrived, flashing his brilliant white smile and kissing my cheek as if he were the most devoted son in the world. The hypocrisy of it was breathtaking. "Mom, you look stunning," he said, pulling out my chair. "A vision in red." "You clean up nice yourself, Ethan," I replied, settling into the supple leather of the booth. He immediately took control, as he always did, summoning the sommelier with a flick of his wrist. He ordered a bottle of Cabernet that cost more than my first tractor. When it arrived and was poured with reverent ceremony, he raised his glass. "A toast," he declared, his voice full of that false, booming sincerity he used in boardrooms. "To your next chapter, Mom. A peaceful, well-deserved rest, free from all the stress of running the farm." I met his gaze over the rim of my glass and clinked it gently against his. "To new beginnings," I said, my voice perfectly neutral. For the next 20 minutes, he laid out my future for me, as if he were presenting a corporate strategy. He spoke of a high-end retirement community in Austin. "It has a pool, Mom, and group activities. You could take up watercolor painting." He talked about the 24-hour nursing staff and the proximity to the best cardiac specialists. "You won't have to worry about a thing." He was systematically stripping me of my life, my independence, my identity, and repackaging it as a benevolent gift. I let him talk, nodding and making small sounds of agreement, lulling him into a state of complete security. Finally, when the waiter had taken our order, I decided it was time to begin. "It all sounds just wonderful, dear," I said, dabbing my lips with the linen napkin. "But there's one little thing that my old foggy brain can't seem to figure out." "What's that, Mom?" he asked, leaning back, the picture of magnanimity. "Well, you said the farm was worth $4 million and you sold it for that price. That's a lot of money. So, where is it all? You only gave me $15,000. He chuckled, a low, patronizing sound that grated on my every nerve. "Mom, please don't worry your head about the complexities of high finance. I've invested it. The full $4 million. It's in a groundbreaking new tech startup out of Silicon Valley. They have a proprietary algorithm that's going to revolutionize the entire logistics industry. In 5 years, that $4 million will be 20. I'm securing our family's future for generations." He was so proud of his lie, so utterly convinced of his own brilliance. "Oh," I said, my eyes wide with feigned childlike wonder. "That sounds amazing. But what if what if it doesn't work out? What happens to all that money then?" His smile tightened. The mask of patience was beginning to crack. "Mom, it will work out. You have to trust me. I know what I'm doing. Trust me." The audacity was stunning. I have to pause here. To sit there and be told to trust the very person who has orchestrated your ruin. It's a level of betrayal that steals the air from your lungs. I have to ask you all. If you were in my shoes right at that moment, what would you have done? What would your first words have been? Let me know in the comments. I truly want to know because in that moment I felt so utterly alone. Now back to that dinner. The first act of my play was over. It was time for the star witness to take the stage. What did he think was going to happen next? The waiter arrived with our main courses. Ethan's was a massive, perfectly cooked porterhouse steak. Mine was a delicate piece of salmon. He dug in with gusto, the victorious warrior enjoying the spoils of conquest. I merely pushed the asparagus around on my plate. My stomach was a tight, angry knot. Every bite would have tasted of betrayal. "So about those papers, Ethan," I began again, my voice now taking on a slightly more confused, quavering tone. "I've been sitting here trying to remember, and for the life of me I can't picture signing them. My memory is just so foggy these days." I tapped my temple with a perfectly manicured finger. He sighed, the long-suffering sigh of a man burdened with an aging parent. He put down his knife and fork. "Mom, we've been over this. You signed them last month. You came to my office. We had a long talk about it. You told me the ranch was becoming too much of a burden, that you wanted me to handle everything from now on." The lie was so elaborate, so detailed. He had clearly rehearsed it. He was trying to build a new reality around me, one in which I was a willing participant in my own demise. "That's the thing, dear," I said, letting a genuine tremor of anger seep into my voice. "I know I didn't. I never said those words. I never signed those papers. That is not my signature." His face, which had been a mask of feigned patience, hardened into a cold, clinical glare. The charming sun vanished, replaced by a ruthless stranger. "Mom, this is exactly what I was afraid of. Your memory is failing badly. You're becoming paranoid. This is why I had to step in and take control. It was to protect you from yourself." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. He was going to have me declared incompetent. That had been his checkmate move all along. He would use my own love and fear against me. Just as I was about to unleash the fury I had been holding back all night, a calm, clear voice cut through the tense silence at our table. "Good evening, Eleanor." I turned, a slow, deliberate movement. Bea stood there, a picture of professional elegance in a dark gray suit, her leather briefcase held firmly in one hand. She offered me a warm, reassuring smile before turning her cool, analytical gaze upon my son. Ethan's jaw practically hit the table. He stared at her, then back at me, the gears in his clever mind grinding, trying to process this new, unwelcome variable. The color began to drain from his face as a dawning horror crept into his eyes. "Mom? Who is this woman? What the hell is going on here?" "Ethan," I said, and for the first time that night, my smile was real wide and filled with the promise of pain. "I'd like you to meet Beatrice Chun. She's my lawyer." I paused, letting the words sink in and savoring the look of pure panic that flashed across his face. "She has a few questions for you about those papers you were just telling me about." The hunter had just looked down and realized he was standing in the middle of a perfectly laid trap. The air crackled with a tension so thick you could cut it with a steak knife. The real dinner party was about to begin. How could he possibly talk his way out of this one? Bea slid into the booth beside me with the practiced ease of a litigator entering a courtroom. She placed her briefcase on the seat and clicked it open, the sound echoing in the sudden silence at our table. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice crisp and professional, devoid of any emotion. "A pleasure to finally meet you in person. As your mother mentioned, I am her legal counsel. She retained my firm 6 months ago to conduct a full review and restructuring of her assets and estate." Ethan stared at her, then darted a panicked look at me. His mind was clearly racing, trying to calculate the angles to find an escape route. I don't understand," he stammered, his composure shattering. "Mom, why would you need a lawyer? We're family." "That's a very good question," Bea said smoothly, pulling a thin file from her briefcase. She laid a single document on the white tablecloth. It was a copy of the sales agreement Ethan had shown me earlier. "Let's start with this. My firm engaged the services of a Mr. David Chan, no relation, who is one of the top forensic handwriting experts in the country. He conducted a thorough analysis of the signature on this document against 36 certified samples of your mother's signature, dating back to 1985. She then slid a second, much thicker spiral-bound document across the table. It was filled with enlarged images, comparison charts, and technical jargon. His sworn affidavit and 24-page report conclude, with 100% certainty, that the signature on the deed of sale is a forgery. And I quote, "an amateurish if diligent attempt." Ethan went pale. That's a lie. It's absurd. She signed it. I was there when she did it." "Were you?" Bea asked softly, her eyes narrowing. She reached into her briefcase again and produced a glossy 8x10 photograph. She laid it on top of the report. The image was grainy but unmistakable. It was a still frame from a security camera, showing Ethan sitting alone at his large mahogany desk, a pen in his hand, a sheet of paper covered in looping practice signatures in front of him. "Our investigator found it interesting that the security logs for your office building show you were the only person to enter or exit your private office during the entire 48-hour period this document was supposedly signed by your mother. This footage is from the camera in the hallway, by the way. Time-stamped." Ethan looked as if he had been physically struck. "Where? How did you? This is an invasion of my privacy." "It gets worse, Ethan," I said, my voice cold and steady, taking the baton from Bea. She gave a slight nod. I reached into my purse and pulled out the elegant fountain pen I had given him. I placed it on the table. It looked innocent, expensive. A little birthday gift, remember? Bea reached over and discreetly pressed a tiny button on the pen's clip. "I've sold the farm. For $4 million. It's for your own good." His own voice, captured in crystal-clear digital audio, filled the space between us. He stared at the pen as if it were a venomous snake poised to strike. Bea delivered the coup de grace. "And as for your supposed buyer, Lone Star Holdings? A shell corporation you registered yourself in Delaware 2 months ago, using a P.O. box. The funding source for the $4 million transfer? Your own offshore account in the Cayman Islands, An account you failed to declare to the IRS last year. You didn't sell the farm to anyone, Ethan. You created an elaborate fiction to steal it from your own mother. Every lie, every deception, laid bare on a white linen tablecloth. He was boxed in, exposed, and utterly defeated. What could he possibly say now? Just as Ethan opened his mouth, a choked, desperate sound escaping his lips, another figure materialized at our table. It was Sam. My younger son's face was pale, but his eyes were firm with a righteous anger I had rarely seen in him. He placed a protective hand on my shoulder, then looked directly at his older brother. "Ethan," Sam said, his voice low but carrying the weight of his conviction, "I think you should know. I just got off the phone with Mr. Davison, our family banker for the last 30 years. He felt it was his duty to call me after he received a subpoena this afternoon. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit has just frozen all of your accounts, Ethan. Both domestic and the one in the Caymans. They're investigating you for felony wire fraud and money laundering." That was the final fatal blow. The carefully constructed world of Ethan Vance, the financial genius, the master manipulator, imploded in an instant. He wasn't just facing his mother's lawyer anymore. He was facing the full terrifying weight of the United States government. The fight, the arrogance, the deceit. It all evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, pathetic shell of a man. He slumped in his chair, covering his face with his hands, and began to sob. Not quiet, dignified tears, but ugly, gasping sobs that shook his entire body. "Mom!" he wailed, his voice muffled by his hands. "Mom, please. I'm so sorry. You have to help me." "Help you?" I asked, my voice a whisper of ice. "Why, Ethan? Why would you do this to me? To the memory of your father? To this family?" That's when the dam of his resentment broke. The pathetic excuses came pouring out. He cried about how he'd always felt like a disappointment, how he thought Dad had favored Sam's artistic soul over his business acumen. He spun a tragic tale of wanting to be a composer, a musician, but feeling crushed by the expectation that he would be the one to manage the family's wealth. "I just wanted to prove I was better than him," he cried, his face streaked with tears. "I was going to turn that 4 million into 20. I was going to show you all. I was going to give you the world. By investing in that revolutionary tech company?" Bea interjected, her voice cutting through his self-pity. "The one that my investigator discovered has no employees, no product, and an office that's just a mailbox in Palo Alto?" He shook his head, wiping his nose with the back of his hand like a child. The grand, sophisticated lie finally gave way to the grubby, pathetic truth. "It wasn't a tech company," he mumbled, his voice thick with shame and defeat. It was crypto. These new coins. They were supposed to be the next Bitcoin. The online advisor, the group chat. They all said it was a sure thing. 1,000% return in 6 months. Bea and I exchanged a look. It wasn't just greed, it was utter foolishness. "Ethan," I said slowly, the full scope of the disaster dawning on me. "Be honest with me right now. How much of that $4 million is left?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at the remnants of his expensive stake and delivered the final devastating epitaph to his genius. "The market, it was a pump and dump scheme. A rug pull, they called it. It's all gone. There's maybe $300,000 left in the exchange wallet. $4 million. 40 years of my sweat and my husband's dreams. Evaporated. Stolen and then squandered by the very son we had raised to protect it." The silence at the table was the sound of a family breaking apart. How does one even begin to comprehend a betrayal of this magnitude? The confession hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. $4 million, a lifetime of work, reduced to a pittance by a scam that preyed on the greedy and the gullible. The poetic justice was so brutal it offered no satisfaction, only a profound, hollow sadness. He hadn't just been a monster. He'd been a fool. "So," I said, my voice eerily calm as I processed the enormity of the loss. "You forged my name, sold my home, tried to have me declared mentally incompetent, and lost nearly all of the money. And your plan was to put me in an apartment with a $15,000 check and a pat on the head." He just sobbed, his shoulders shaking, unable to form a coherent response. He was a completely broken man. Bea, ever the professional, cleared her throat to bring the focus back to the immediate practical crisis. "Ethan, your self-pity is irrelevant at this point," she stated coldly. "The fact is you are facing a raft of serious federal charges. Given the evidence, the forgery, the recordings, the fraudulent corporation, the international money laundering, a conviction is a near certainty. A federal prosecutor will likely be seeking a sentence of 10 to 15 years in a federal penitentiary." "Prison," he choked out, his face a mask of pure terror. No, Mom, you can't let them send me to prison. Please. I'll do anything. I'll pay it back, I swear. I'll work for the rest of my life." This was the moment, the crossroads of my life. A deep primal part of me, the part of my heart that he had shredded, wanted to see him pay. I wanted him to learn the hard lesson of consequences in a cold, unforgiving cell. I wanted him to lose his freedom just as he had tried to take mine. But then I looked at Sam, my good, kind son. His face etched with pain for the brother he still, on some level, loved. And I looked at the pathetic, blubbering mess that was my firstborn, and I saw the ghost of the little boy who used to fall asleep in my arms. It was a war raging inside my soul. Vengeance versus mercy. Sam spoke first, his voice a quiet plea. "Mom, what he did was monstrous. Unforgivable. But sending him to prison, it won't bring the money back. It will just destroy what's left of our family forever. Is there another way?" I took a deep, shuddering breath. I was still the CEO of this family, and it was time to make the toughest executive decision of my life. I looked at Ethan, my eyes as hard as diamonds. "I will give you one chance, Ethan," I said, my voice low and powerful, leaving no room for negotiation. "One chance to avoid having me take the stand and personally bury you in a federal court. One chance to begin to atone for what you have done. But this is not a discussion. These are my terms and they are absolute." B, who had already anticipated this possibility, slid a new, clean folder onto the table. "Here is the offer," I laid out, my voice ringing with an authority he had never heard from me before. "Tomorrow morning, you will transfer every last cent of that remaining $300,000 to a restitution account. You will then sign over the titles to your house, your cars, and liquidate every single asset you own. It will all go into that account. And for the next 365 days, you will come home to the farm. You will work from sunrise to sunset for no pay. You will live in the small, one-room cabin by the barn. You will eat with the hands you used to look down upon. You will learn, through the sweat of your own brow, what it means to build something instead of just taking it. It is that, or I walk away and let the federal justice system have you. Do you accept my terms?" He looked at me, his tear-filled eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a desperate, flickering hope. It was a choice between hell and a chance at purgatory. Which would he choose? Ethan accepted the terms with a series of frantic, desperate nods. There was no negotiation, no argument. He was a drowning man, and I had thrown him the only lifeline he was going to get. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, managed with cold efficiency by B. Ethan, looking henpecked and defeated, signed away his life. The sprawling house in the suburbs, the sleek German SUV, the tailored suits, the portfolio of stocks, all of it was liquidated. He was left with 2 suitcases of clothes and a box of personal effects, which he moved into the dusty, Spartan worker's cabin at the far end of the property. The cabin had a simple cot, a single hot plate, and a shared bathroom 100 yards away. His new life began before the sun rose on the following Monday. I was there myself at 5 a.m., my knock on his flimsy cabin door sharp and unforgiving. He emerged bleary-eyed, looking lost and out of place in his new cheap work clothes. The look on his face when I handed him a pair of stiff, worn leather gloves and pointed him toward the mountain of manure that needed to be cleared from the horse stables was a sight I will never forget. This was the man who, just a week earlier, had been making million-dollar decisions. Now, his most important tool was a pitchfork. The first 3 months were a crucible designed to burn away the man he had become. His hands, accustomed to the smooth surface of a smartphone screen, were a raw, bloody mess of blisters within days. His back, which had only ever known the comfort of ergonomic Italian leather office chairs, was in a constant state of agony from lifting 50-pound feed sacks and digging post holes for new fences under the relentless Texas sun. He moved like an old man, slow and pained, his body screaming in protest against a lifetime of soft living. He was an outcast. The other farmhands, especially my loyal Carlos, watched him with a mixture of contempt and suspicion. They knew he was my son, and though they didn't know the details, they knew he had committed a great sin against me and against the farm. They gave him a wide berth, offering no friendly words, no shared jokes, no camaraderie. He ate his meals alone at the end of the long table in the mess hall, surrounded by a wall of silence. He was utterly, completely alone, adrift in a world he had once believed he owned. I maintained a strict professional distance. I was his boss, his warden, nothing more. Each morning I would give him his work list on a clipboard. Each evening, I would inspect his work with a critical, unforgiving eye. There was no praise, no motherly affection. He had forfeited that right. Wow, what a turn of events. It took everything in me to look at my son in that state and not soften, not give in to the maternal instinct to comfort him. If you're still here with me on this journey, I just want to say thank you for your support. It means the world. If you're still listening, could you do me a favor and just comment the number 1 below? I'd love to see who has stuck with me this far. One scorching afternoon, about a month into his sentence, I found him sitting by the creek, not even trying to hide the tears of pain and frustration streaming down his face as he soaked his raw hands in the cool water. He looked up as I approached, his eyes filled with a desperate plea. "Mom, will you ever be able to forgive me for what I did?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I stood there for a long moment, the sounds of the farm, the lowing of cattle, the buzz of cicadas, filling the silence. I looked out at the land he had tried to take, at the life he had tried to end. "Forgiveness isn't a light switch, Ethan," I told him, my voice as hard and unyielding as the baked earth beneath our feet. "It's not something I can just decide to give you. It has to be built from the ground up with sweat and honesty and time, just like this farm was. And right now, you've only just started digging the foundation." I turned and walked away, leaving him alone with my words, and the hard truth of the long road ahead. Was I being too cruel, or was this tough love the only thing that could save his soul? As the brutal Texas summer bled into the gentler days of autumn, I began to observe a gradual, almost imperceptible shift in Ethan. The physical transformation was stark. The city softness was gone, replaced by the lean, hard muscle of a man who engaged in physical labor from dawn till dusk. His skin was tanned a deep brown, and the calluses on his hands were thick and permanent. But the more profound changes were the ones happening behind his eyes. He stopped just enduring the work, he started engaging with it. The vacant, resentful look was replaced by one of focus, and then of curiosity. I started finding him in the barn late at night, long after his work was done, not slumped on his cot, but poring over old books on crop rotation and veterinary science I kept in my office. He began to ask Carlos questions. At first they were hesitant, almost shy. "Carlos, why do we plant the winter rye in this field and not that one?" Or "How can you tell if a cow is sick just by the look in her eyes?" Carlos, my quiet, observant friend, who had initially treated Ethan with a frosty disdain, slowly began to respond. I'd see them leaning against a fence post, Carlos pointing at the horizon, explaining the subtle signs of a coming norther, and Ethan listening with an intensity one had never seen in him before. He wasn't just hearing the words, he was absorbing them. He was learning the language of the land, a language he had ignored his entire life. He was earning, not demanding, respect. The true test, the moment that showed me something real was changing, came in late October. A freak thunderstorm rolled in with terrifying speed, unleashing a torrent of rain and violent winds. In the middle of the night, a deafening crack echoed across the farm. I rushed to the window and saw that a massive, ancient oak tree, one that had stood sentinel over this land since before my time, had been struck by lightning. It had fallen directly across the main road, its massive branches completely blocking our only way in or out. The power lines had snapped, plunging the entire farm into a chaotic, windswept darkness. Panic began to ripple through the bunkhouse. But then a voice cut through the noise, clear and commanding. It was Ethan. "Carlos, get the big generator started and run a line to the main house and the well pump," he shouted over the roar of the wind. "Maria, you and I will check the livestock in the north barn. It's the most exposed. Everyone else, get the chainsaws, the heavy-duty flashlights, and the tow chains from the workshop. We need to clear that road before sunrise in case an ambulance or fire truck needs to get through. There was no arrogance in his voice, no hint of the boardroom tyrant. It was the voice of a natural leader, calm and logical in a crisis. He didn't just give orders. He was the first one out in the driving rain, mud splattering his face, a chainsaw in his hands. He worked alongside the men all night, his body straining, his resolve unbreakable. By dawn, exhausted, soaked and covered in mud, they had cleared a path. As I stood on the porch with a thermos of hot coffee for the crew, I watched my son, my Ethan, leaning against the pickup truck, sharing a weary but genuine laugh with Carlos. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I saw a glimpse of the man he could be. It was a man defined not by what he could acquire, but by what he could protect and contribute. Could this one heroic act in a storm truly signify a permanent change in the climate of his soul? The final day of Ethan's 365-day sentence arrived on a crisp, perfect autumn morning. The Texas sky was a vast, cloudless blue, and the air had the clean, hopeful scent of a new season. An entire year had passed since that night of reckoning at the governor's table. A year of unrelenting labor, of social isolation, and of quiet, painful introspection. In that year, Ethan had not missed a single day of work. He had never once complained, never once asked for special treatment. He had transformed from a clueless city boy into a remarkably capable farmer. He knew the subtle signs of illness in the cattle, could expertly prune the pecan trees, and could fix the farm's ancient, cantankerous tractor with a skill that rivaled Carlos's. He had, in essence, learned the farm from the soil up. His commitment had extended beyond the fences of our property. He had cooperated fully with the federal investigators, providing them with every detail of the cryptocurrency scam. His testimony was instrumental in the conviction of two of the key figures behind the fraudulent operation. Through the court-ordered restitution from the criminals and the complete liquidation of his own former life, he had managed to return a total of $800,000 to the farm's accounts. It was a long way from $4 million, but it was a tangible symbol of his effort to make amends. That afternoon, Bea drove out to the farm, her ever-present briefcase in hand. We gathered around the long, rustic dining table in the main house, the same table where Ethan had once been an outcast. Today he sat as an equal. Me, Bea, and Sam, who had driven all the way from Santa Fe to be there, sat with him. Ethan was quiet, his calloused hands resting on the table. He was dressed in a clean work shirt and jeans, his face tanned, his eyes clear. The last vestiges of the arrogant, entitled man he had been were gone, burned away by a year of humility and hard work. Bea laid out a final report, a dry legal document that summarized a year of profound human change. It detailed his perfect compliance with every single term of our agreement. When she finished speaking, a heavy, expectant silence filled the room. All eyes, Bea's, Sam's, Ethan's, turned to me. This was the moment. The verdict. Ethan looked at me, his gaze direct and unwavering. There was no fear in his eyes, only a quiet acceptance. "Mom," he said, his voice steady, though I could see a slight tremor in his hands. "Before you say anything, I just need to say thank you. This past year you could have let me go to prison. You could have washed your hands of me forever. But you gave me this. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it saved my life. You didn't just give me a way to avoid a cell. You gave me a way to find myself again. Whatever you decide today, I will understand. And I will always be grateful for the chance you gave me." He had said all the right things. He had done all the right things. But a year of good behavior couldn't simply erase a lifetime of selfishness and a betrayal that had almost destroyed me. My next words would determine the future of the Vance family forever. What path was I going to choose? I let the silence stretch, studying the face of my firstborn son. I saw the deep lines of remorse etched around his eyes, the humility in the set of his shoulders that had been forged not by defeat, but by the quiet dignity of hard, honest work. The slick, arrogant boy who had walked into my house a year ago, ready to discard me, was gone. In his place sat a man, humbled and forged anew. 1 year ago, Ethan, I began, my voice clear and steady, resonating with the history of our shared pain. You sat in this very house and tried to erase my life's work. You tried to turn 40 years of my heart and soul into a footnote in your own selfish story of greed. He flinched at the starkness of the words but did not look away. He owned his past. He accepted the truth. But in this past year, I continued, my voice softening as I acknowledged the man he had become, you have done the opposite. You have honored this land. You have honored the memory of your father. You have honored the work. You have learned, in the most profound way possible, what it means to build something instead of just taking it. You have started to build back your own character, your own soul, brick by painful, honest brick. I reached into a folder B had prepared and slid a new document across the polished oak table. It wasn't a letter of dismissal. It wasn't a document of pardon. It was a contract of employment. I am offering you a position, I announced. Not as my automatic heir. Not as the prodigal son returning to a feast. But as the official junior manager of Bluebonnet Creek Farm. You will receive a modest, fair salary. You will have real responsibilities and a voice in our operational decisions. And you will have the opportunity to help me grow this legacy for the future, for your brother, and maybe one day for a family of your own, should you be so blessed. Tears welled in Ethan's eyes, but for the first time, they were not tears of self-pity or fear. They were tears of profound, overwhelming gratitude. He stared at the contract as if it were a holy text. But, Mom, he choked out. After everything, do you trust me? Trust is a long road, Ethan, I answered honestly. And you are only 1 year into a lifelong journey. This contract has conditions. I nodded to B. B will continue to have financial oversight for the next 3 years. Any major decision involving the farm's assets will require my signature and hers. You will earn back our complete trust, day by day, decision by decision. He nodded vigorously, not even needing to read the fine print. I accept. Thank you, Mom. I accept everything. Sam, who had been watching with tears in his own eyes, stood up and walked around the table. He put a hand on his brother's shoulder, a gesture of forgiveness and acceptance. Then he pulled Ethan into a fierce brotherly hug. Ethan clung to him, sobbing openly. I rose from my chair, my heart aching with a beautiful, painful mix of emotions, and wrapped my arms around both of my boys. Right there, in the heart of the home he had tried to shatter, my family, fractured and broken, began the slow, difficult process of becoming whole again. Life taught me that sometimes, the most painful betrayals become the most powerful opportunities for growth, forgiveness, and genuine transformation. My son lost a fortune of my money, but in doing so, he found something far more valuable. He found his soul. And I had not only protected my assets and my legacy, but I had gotten my son back. A better, stronger, humbler version of the man he was always meant to be. Thank you all so much for listening to my story. It wasn't an easy one to tell, but it's a story of survival and hope. Has your family ever been tested by a deep betrayal? Have you ever had to find the strength within you to offer a second chance when every part of you wanted to walk away for good? Please share your own experiences in the comments below. Your stories matter, and they can give strength and hope to others who might be going through their own dark times. Please, if my story touched you, give it a like so more people can find it, and subscribe for more stories of life, loss, and the incredible resilient power of the human spirit.